If it looks like I'm crying, it's because I stabbed myself in the eye with my my mascara wand. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jamie and today we are wrapping up all of the things that I read in February. So I started off the month by reading My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I read this for a book club, which is cool. I'm in a book club. Really excited about that. It is set in the 80s and it is about a young high school girl and her friend dealing with an exorcism. It kind of gives itself away in the title. The main character is named Abby. When she was in the 4th grade, I believe, she becomes best friends with this girl named Gretchen. They are 100% best friends, like twin flame kind of thing. Years later, once they're in high school, they are at a get-together where they drop acid and then Gretchen goes missing for the night. And when they find her in an abandoned shack on the property, she is sick and starts behaving differently, and the rest of the book is just Abby trying to figure out what's going on with Gretchen and how to help her. If you liked Stranger Things, you will love this book. It is about 40% 80s pop culture references and 60% weird shit that's going on. We've got possession, we've got gross things, we've got body horror. I, as a person who can't stand that much in the way of horror, I really enjoyed the book. I think it had a good level between realistic scary things and spiritual scary things. This is my first Grady Hendrix book and I think he's got a really good voice, a really good narrative voice, especially for an 80s book. This is a bit of a spoiler, but I was very surprised this was not a sapphic novel. I was fully prepared for it to be 100% sapphic. If you are looking for a sapphic horror, look elsewhere. This is 100% just friendship. Still great, not a complaint, just not where I thought it was going. Keeping my cat out of the frame. Okay. This book deals specifically with the satanic panic of the 80s, which is interesting to learn about, but it was a bit on the nose. And this just brings up something I've noticed with certain authors where something is really researched and it feels like the author just got really excited about something and did as much research as they could and tried to put as many facts and or examples into the book about this thing. So with T. Kingfisher, I've talked before about how she will put like just random expertise. With this, with the satanic panic, it just kind of feels like Grady Hendrix was putting as many examples of this as possible. This is not a bad thing. This is not a critique. This is just something I've noticed with certain books where it just feels kind of clinical, kind of over-researched, kind of like I'm just being lectured all of these facts in a vacuum as if they were writing the book in order to show off how many facts they knew about this thing. And that's just kind of something I noticed with this book when it comes to the satanic panic. If you're interested in the satanic panic and you want to read a horror book about it, there you go. Also, if you like Stranger Things. Full Metal Alchemist, I am not gonna do like a book review because Full Metal Alchemist, I don't know if I've said it on my main channel before, but it is like the best story I've ever read. Like when I talk about storytelling, Full Metal Alchemist is one of the first examples. I'm gonna say it wrong, but Hiroma Arakawa just like knows exactly where her characters are, what they know at the time, how and when to reveal it, and her characters are moving all over the place and they're like different groups of characters that know different levels of things, and it's just wonderful. I grew up watching Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is the anime that is a more close adaptation of the manga. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I never actually read the manga growing up. I only watched Brotherhood, and because it's an anime adaptation, they had to cut a few things or rearrange a few things in order for it to meet the like animation time frame and also to kind of simplify things because animation is so much work, right? So there are a couple scenes that come out of nowhere. There are a few things where like the episode starts and I'm like, how did we get there? Or where did this character come from? And so I thought, maybe the manga will explain that. So I started collecting the omnibus 3-in-1 mangas. I did this specifically because there is one episode in particular. I don't know how to explain this. They kind of start in the middle of a mission, and I wanted to know how we got there. It's explained through context clues, but I wanted to see how we got to that point in the mission. So I decided to start reading the mangas. I finally get to the manga where that episode is in, where that comes from. And guess what? The manga just starts in the middle of the mission too. So I did this all for nothing. I mean, not for nothing. I still like the manga. It's got a lot of other scenes and stuff, some cute bonus content that I'm really interested in. I'm so upset that I've been collecting these specifically to get answers to why that episode is the way that it is. And that it is the way it is because the manga is just like that. And I feel so horrible. Next thing I read was Fahrenheit 451. You might have seen my short about this. I had this idea of like reading everything I own first. I mean, I've done this before. It doesn't usually work. So I picked Fahrenheit 451 and I'm gonna keep it. I'm glad I have it. Funny thing, actually, Ray Bradbury, the person who wrote it, if you didn't know, actually grew up and lived in Waukegan, Illinois, which is where I just moved from. So I lived there for a couple of years and I still didn't read this. But as soon as I move out of Waukegan, I read Fahrenheit 451. Anyway, most people read this in like high school or even middle school because it's a foundational text for the dystopian genre, and it has a lot of, you know, things that are easy lessons for students to learn. I never had to read it in high school. So this is my first introduction to this book, but I did read a lot of dystopians during the dystopian YA hype that was 2012 to 2016. I'm familiar with the dystopian tropes, and I kept having to remind myself that this was an old classic book, not a new book that was stealing tropes from other people. I guess you can't really steal a trope. I kept having to remind myself that this influenced those books because in my head, this was so familiar because I'd read other dystopian books. I don't know if I'm making any sense. I'm doing this without notes. It's fine. Like I said, I'm glad that I read it. I think you should read it too, especially if you haven't read the dystopian genre. But if you are familiar with dystopia, if you went through that YA dystopian trend like I did, this is going to feel very familiar. It is very short. The rest of this is like short stories and like context, introduction and stuff. So it's only like 100 and something pages. I think 170 pages. I guess I didn't even say what this is about. This is about a dystopian world far into the future where media is kind of illegal and owning books is illegal. And so the main character is a guy who burns books, but then he feels this draw to have books as well. And it's fine. This is Starfire by Kami Garcia and Gabriel Piccolo. I have been a fan of Gabriel Piccolo for his casual Teen Titans web comic / fan art that he does on his Instagram. Then I watched him get hired at DC and work with Kami Garcia to make these graphic novels. It is a retelling or a reinvention of the Teen Titans origin stories. With the graphic novels, to my understanding, they are outside of the canon when it comes to like New 52 / Rebirth, the actual comics. They can kind of diverge from canon and do their own thing. I think that's what's happening here. There are a bunch of teenagers that have powers for some reason. I don't know, it's a comic book, and this guy is trying to round them up to bring them to this organization called Hive to experiment on them, and they don't want to be experimented on, and so they find all of the people that he's searching for and they get together, and eventually they will, I assume, bring down Hive, probably. We started out with Raven, Beast Boy, Robin, and now this is the Starfire installment. So we're getting Starfire's backstory. Originally, I believe she is an alien. This one just says she has powers. I assume for the fact that she's in the sun, powers came from the sun, or am I thinking of Superman? I might be thinking of Superman. This also has Cyborg's introduction. Do they give him a name? I can't remember. Okay, hold on. I don't think they even give him a name. I'm looking at it because they've had several introductions and he's just unnamed. I know him as Cyborg because that's who he is, but something that's cool to note is that Starfire has EDS It looks like Kami Garcia might also have EDS, like Starfire and Me, so she's putting it into her book, which is great. That's all I had to say about Starfire. I love the comic books. Next is another sequel, Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales. I believe this is the last book in this Emily Wilde trilogy, anthology, whatever it is. So the series is about Emily Wilde, who is a dryadologist. A dryadologist is a person who studies fairies. The book is an epistolary novel. It is her journals. She's writing down her adventures and her innermost thoughts about these adventures. In the first book, she goes to something called Loisland, which is somewhere in the Scandinavian. I don't know exactly if they said Norway or Sweden or anything, but it's somewhere up there to study some volatile fairies in the north. She is kind of rivals with this guy named Wendell Bambleby. She's a professor, he's a professor. She doesn't really agree with his ethics, his professor ethics, but he comes to help her in this land of fairies, and they end up being more than just rivals, you know? Big spoiler, but we do learn that Wendell is a fairy prince. He's a prince of the Irish part of fairyland. He's been exiled because his stepmother has taken over the kingdom and exiled him and killed all of his other family, which is very dramatic, but pretty normal for fairies. The second book, they're in Austria, and I believe, it's been a while since I read it, but I believe they are specifically there to look for an entrance into Wendell's home. And in that book, again, spoilers, Wendell has proposed to her. She has kind of left him on red, said, I gotta think about it. Maybe let's just like actually date for a little while. But they are, you know, bantering, bickering. And again, big spoiler, Emily finds her way into his home land and overthrows the queen. This book, we are entering into fairy, specifically his domain, where they're the entire time. Wendell and Emily are now fully engaged. She has accepted his proposal, and they are like kind of preparing for not only the wedding and her being queen, him being the king, but also just like figuring out how to fix whatever the last queen did to his land. I was ready. I was super excited for this. I was like, we're gonna be in fairy. We're gonna see Wendell as a fairy. We're gonna see him as a king. Like, oh my God, we're gonna see their relationship really bloom. Disappointed. Wholeheartedly disappointed by this book. It is so boring. And I feel like other people have said the other books were boring too. I didn't find them boring at all. This one, so boring. I've called it a hurry up and wait novel where everyone's just sitting there talking about the things that they need to be doing, but they don't actually do anything. And I feel like a lot of third books, specifically in trilogies, do that. And it's because they have to like gather all of their resources in order to defeat the big bad at the very end. So the first part of the third book is almost always just hurry up and wait. Like, we've got to catch everybody up on what's going on, why it sucks, what the obstacles are, and then, you know, we're finally able to defeat the big bad. This one didn't even really have a big bad at the end. It did not. Another thing I have to critique is that I never question Wendell's interest in Emily, because he is 100% fawning over her the entire time. He like fully understands that as a mortal, she's going to be like out of place in fairy. She's gonna feel out of place in fairy. And so he's trying to give her space and like, you know, make her feel like she fits in and give her these extravagant gifts of like handmade journals and beautiful dresses and like a whole space to herself where she can escape to if being in fairy is just too much. Always turning to her to guide him for whatever kingly duties he needs to do. She's like giving him advice on how to run the country. Emily, on the other hand, like doesn't reciprocate that at all. In fact, she spends more time talking about how much she loves Shadow the dog than how much she loves Wendell when she is engaged to him. In the first book, it made sense because she wasn't you know, she didn't know that he was interested in her, and so she's talking about how handsome he is, but she's like, oh, he gets on my nerves, and you know, he's cute and he kind of understands me, but like, you know, he's Wendell, right? In the second book, after he's, you know, kind of confessed his interest in her, she's, you know, sitting there being like, I don't know how I feel. So it kind of makes sense that she's not reciprocating as much because she's still figuring out her own emotions. But she has fully committed to him. She has accepted a proposal. They are getting married, and I'm sitting here questioning if she loves him. Big spoiler. I do feel like I have to say this though. There are 2 fake out deaths. I'm not gonna say who it is, but there are 2 fake out deaths, and I really hate that. I hate fake out deaths. I think they're stupid. I think if you're gonna kill somebody, commit to killing them. There are only very few iterations of a fake out death that actually make sense and give me that emotional depth that I'm looking for. As soon as a certain character was claimed to have died, no, they didn't. They did not die. I know that. You know that. There were quite a few characters I didn't feel like were needed, specifically Wendell's sister. Wendell has a half-sister who for a brief second is claimed to be a threat to his throne because she's, you know, the stepmother's biological daughter. She's not a threat. She's not used really at all. She's kind of off page for 90% of the book, and I feel like she was only really put in for one scene, and that scene could have used literally anybody else that was already introduced and had more use in the book. Very disappointed with how slow it was, how bored I was. I had to put it down a few times because I was just like so tired of reading it. This is the last book. We are supposed to be fully 100% rooting for this couple. They are committed to each other, and I was questioning whether Emily even knew Wendell, if she really truly loved him. That's not something you should be doing in the last book of a romance series. Since that was such a disappointment, I decided to read another fairy romance with autistic coded characters. You might know it, Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. Okay, it's a few hours later, and I was just sitting here and I realized that I really did not explain Half a Soul very well at all, so I am going to retake that part. So if I look a bit weird, the lighting's different, my makeup's gone. It's just because I didn't want to have to deal with editing that, so I just thought I'd re-explain it. Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater is about a young girl named Theodora, also called Dora. She's just Dora throughout the entire thing. When she's very young, a fairy lord, something or other, comes in and takes half of her soul as payment for something that her mom agreed to. She did not agree to it. He was meaning to take her whole soul. Her cousin Victoria stops him with a pair of scissors, embroidery scissors that are iron. Fairies, you know, they don't like iron, so he can only take half of her soul. Years later, they are trying to enter society and find husbands. Because Dora's soul was like split, she herself now is kind of weird. She doesn't react well to people, like her actual reactions are different. They're wrong. She doesn't react like a normal person. She doesn't have the same emotional depth as a normal person. She's still very compassionate. She can feel anger, she can feel sadness, but they're just kind of like something happening to her, not something she's experiencing. And she has trouble naming those emotions. She has trouble recognizing when she's feeling them, all this stuff. This is set in Regency era England, so if you're familiar with Pride and Prejudice or Bridgerton, this is kind of in the same vein. It's balls, it's dance cards, it's rigid, strict rules of society. The main plot is basically these 2 girls going to London, A, to find a husband, and B, because of some weird things that are going on. I do want to say that I believe I've heard through the grapevine, I have no idea what the source of this was. Somebody has said that Olivia Atwater was intentionally trying to represent autism. This is autism coding, and I'm not going to say if it's good or bad representation. I'm going to leave that to people with an actual diagnosis, but as somebody who's socially awkward, slightly agoraphobic, who has trouble being empathetic and has trouble, you know, experiencing my emotions in a regulatory way. I'm gonna say that I related heavily to this character, and I related to the idea of feeling like something about you is missing because you're not normal, you're not acting like the people around you, you don't understand how the people around you just kind of inherently know how to act, how to react to things. That heavily hit me. They're like staying at a countess's house. The auntie and the countess are trying to set up Victoria with the Viscount in waiting, and he's got a bunch of younger brothers. One of the younger brothers is kind of like unacceptable. He's the youngest, he doesn't really have an inheritance, and he was in the war because the Napoleonic Wars actually happened in this, and so he's an amputee, and so he's kind of like unsavory. People don't really want him. Our main character, Dora, bumps into him and his best friend, the Lord Sorcier, whose name I kind of forget, started with an E. Elias. He is the magician for England, like the best magician. He can do impossible things, and they were both in the war, they're war buddies, and Elias is kind of prickly, he's kind of mean, and he bumps into Dora and really does not hit it off. He gets off on the wrong foot, he insults her, and she takes it in stride. The auntie and the countess say this is perfect. Dora can, you know, flirt with Albert and get his attention, and then because the family is like in good graces with the family, then Victoria can now get with the Viscount in waiting. That's the setup. Dora and Albert are like upset that they're being smushed together, so they're like, we're gonna kind of pretend to be together just to get these people off of our backs. Obviously, the way I described Lord Sorcier, as he's a prickly, kind of rude, mean guy, he's obviously the guy that's meant for Dora. I don't think I'm, you know, spoiling anything by saying that is the couple that happens, the will they, won't they. While they have this whole romance plot going on, there's also another magical plot, because again, this is fairy Regency era, and there is this sickness that happens to take children specifically, and they go into sort of a coma, but it's really, really bad. And the Lord Sorcier thinks that there's magic involved with this, so they're trying to figure out what the sleeping plague is. The Lord Sorcier, Dora, Albert, even Victoria trying to figure out what this is, you know, help ease the suffering that's happening, as well also having this kind of love quadrangle thing go on, flirting and sarcasm and insults and stuff like that. And it was lovely to read. I really enjoyed it. I'm not a romance person, like I don't really enjoy romance books themselves, specifically contemporary romance, so I do enjoy romantasy, like fantasies that are more romance forward, and that's really what this is. This is like full-blown romantasy. I'm really tired. I've lost all of my steam and I don't want to talk about books anymore. And anyway, those were the books I read in February. That's gonna be it for me. Okay, bye. I wanted to be over here because there's more light. I'm right next to the windows, but having this expansive white wall behind me is very weird.